Are you struggling where you're finding yourself, your videos that you're making that you're trying to do for your business, or you're trying to create your own content, and the videos just, they look like a home video, doesn't look very professional, and you're struggling, you have a ring light, and you're wondering why your videos look completely different than professional videos? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, about a little bit about the basics to help you out with how to level up those videos for yourself. So I'll see you guys on the other side. Let's go. Welcome back to another great episode of Just Create. I'm your host, Thomas Duran. And that intro earlier, that intro that I just did sucked. I felt so bad about that one, but that's okay. It's all right. All right. So I am actually trying something out new right now. If you guys see my head go this way, that's because I decided to show a little preview to my Instagram account. Went live, and so let know people like what it's like. Come over to YouTube. But anyway, actually, I'm gonna hang up right now. It's just not working. All right. So I am really excited about this episode. There's a lot to get to. This is gonna be a very technical based episode. It's not so much on theory or optics of how to actually what kind of videos you use for your business. This is how to actually shoot some videos. Now, I know there's a lot of different channels out there that go into this. I know it's probably explained ad nauseum, and I'm sure that you guys watching this, if you're just if you're already an experienced videographer, you're already going to know this stuff. This is nothing new. This show is geared towards people that are not familiar with their gear or not familiar with how with video, that type of stuff, and it's for people that are trying to shoot their own videos, but like I said, don't have a video production background, because I do encourage people shooting their own videos and try and make it as best as possibly they can. And so that's what this show is all about. It could be a little bit lengthy because there is a lot of information that we want to get into. So let's just get right into it. Before we do, though, let's go ahead and start off with another great quote from Albert Einstein. It says, "Imagination is more important than knowledge," he says. I do find that interesting because knowledge is obviously extremely important, but knowledge can be learned. Knowledge can be sought after, but you have to understand what you're seeking for, right? And so imagination is kind of the first priority before that, to understand the amount of imagination. That I do like that quote because imagination is definitely more important. If you imagine something, you have an idea of something, go pursue it, go find knowledge about it. And that's how I did live stream. That's how I did everything else. And so that's what I did to learn. So let's go ahead and get this started. There we are. So welcome to another new great episode. Like I said, we're going to go into some of the video basics to help level up your video. This is for you, the Rad Dad Chat. It's okay if you don't have a good connection right now. That's quite all right. You can always watch preview and put any comments below, and I'll definitely respond to them. All right, so let me go ahead and start off with the video production basics. There I am. Hello, you beautiful people. There's basically three major elements to leveling up the quality of your video. And this is all very technical based. This has nothing to do in post-production. This is all about actually the production side of your videos, meaning when you actually shoot them and film them. This is not anything based in regards to your content that you drive, because that is an extremely important piece. I'm just talking all about how to get the best quality video aesthetically wise to make it look like a professional video. Obviously, there's a little bit more that goes into it, as in post-production and editing, and then also the actual content that you bring to it. But this is just a small step, a small portion to be able to make it look good. And it all begins in production, or it all begins into, it's not about what you shoot with, it's just how you utilize it to its fullest capacity. So when I break down your camera basics, those settings will generally apply to any camera that you use. Okay. And we'll go into that real quickly as well. So, 3 elements, obviously, is your camera. Making sure you have the correct settings. Like I said, it doesn't matter necessarily what camera it is, because the best camera is the camera that you have, which could be your phone, which could be one of these, or it could be a big cinema camera like I use. I think most people would probably be using the phone. Audio, how important audio is, and then lighting. These 3 elements is what really gives you the foundation to provide a great looking video. That's the foundation and the rock to be able to provide great video. And then you can enhance the videos in post-production. That'll be another show later on. Or you hire someone to do that for you. But this way you can actually create and shoot all the content you want, send it over to an editor, and you're good to go. And the editor will be extremely happy with you because you have great looking video. So we'll start off with the camera basics. The settings. So we'll go. Basically, what we're going to go through with the camera basics is your settings, the composition, because how you compose a shot plays a huge part on what it looks like. Stabilizing tools. There's different tools to use to be able to help stabilize your footage. That could be either a tripod. We'll go a little bit more into that, when to use it, why it's so important to have something to do it with. And then if you don't, and you don't have the budget yet just to purchase it, what are some hacks and tricks that we could do to keep it stabilized? All right, so the next thing is camera settings. So let's go ahead and go into that. Like, these settings are your basic settings that you're going to be using and adjusting anytime you use your camera. Depends on what space you're in, if you're outside, if you're inside, if you're in a dark place or a place with light, lots of light. These are the settings that every camera operator goes through. And obviously these settings, what really affects your image quality. So the very first setting is where a lot of people may not, like I said, videographers, you already know this stuff. But for people that are not familiar and they just leave their cameras on auto, here are the settings that go to auto and adjusts every time you go somewhere. And you can apply this knowledge within the camera that you have. So the very first thing is frame rates per second. So frame rates per second, otherwise known as FPS. This is where you get that look of either being film, aka cinematic, or like TV or reality, broadcast reality news type of feel to it. Okay. I am broadcasting right now. What you are seeing right now, I'm actually broadcasting in 24 frames per second, otherwise known as like 23.978. And that is the standard for film. I like this particular look. It gives it, it helps with the motion blur to it. If you can see, well, that's the shutter, but we'll go a little bit more into that. But the 24 is more of the movie, the movie-esque look to it. I highly suggest that would be your base. That would be your base rate. So when you're doing talking head videos, you could do 30 or you could do 60. But if you notice, when you do higher rate frames per second, and if it's just talking head, higher rate frames per second, you get a little bit more of like, it looks like a lot more reality, looks so clear, and or clear as in there's no filter involved with it, right? There's a different look to it, and you could go with that look. I prefer the look of 24 frames per second. I edit all my videos in 24 frames per second. I shoot my talking head content in 24 frames per second. That's the standard. That's what documentaries are shot off of, that type of thing. When you're going into more of the higher frame rates, like for example, when you shoot 60 or 30, that's like in broadcast TV for like live events or like sporting events. They're going to be shooting at a much higher frame rate per second. That way you're going to actually see almost like a little bit more like as if you were there, what we see on a daily. Also, when you go to the higher frame rates per second, that's when you start getting yourself options to shoot more slow motion. That's how slow motion video is shot, is that they shoot it at 60 frames or 120 frames per second, and then they go and put it on a 24-second frame timeline in post-production, and that's where you get that silky smooth shots, slow motion shots. So there is definitely a times and places for me for what I do when I do shoot 60 frames or 120 frames. However, you're not doing a Martin Scorsese film. You're just trying to shoot, great looking content for talking head. My suggestion is to keep it at 24 frames per second. There's a lot more that goes into that, details on that, and it goes into deeper, but like I said, there's a lot of information here that we got to get into. So that's the very first setting that would keep it as 24 frames. Now, when you keep it at 24 frames per second, then there's the shutter speed that you have to adjust. The shutter speed is the if you're a photographer, shutter speed has to deal with how quickly your shutter takes the picture, right? If you open up the shutter speed, you allow a lot more exposure in, and also when you click on that, it takes a while for it to happen. When you adjust shutter speeds, that's where you get the different looks. If you open up the shutter speed for like a waterfall, you take a waterfall, that's how they get that dreamy, milky looking water effect. Or if you increase your shutter speed and you want it to look more like a Private Ryan film, that's how they do it, where it's choppy, very, very robotic. That's messing with the shutter speed. The general rule of thumb is that your shutter speed needs to be double than what your frame rate per second is. So for example, if you're keeping at 24 frames per second, you need your shutter speed to be 1/48. Now, some cameras don't have 1/48 shutter speed. Sometimes they have it over 150. That's fine. Like for example, my mirrorless camera right here. This is the Canon EOS R. It's like 1/50 versus 1/48. That's what I keep it as, 150. If you're shooting a 30 second or 30 frames per second, then you go to 160 and so on. So it does adjust the exposure a little bit for how much light is in there. But rule of thumb is that you always are going to keep your shutter speed at when you're at 24 frames per second at 1/50. That's what gives you the motion. So if I change my shutter speed, see like there's the blur effect. It might be kind of difficult to see it right here because the latency when it comes to live streaming. However, when it was just recording, you'll see more of the blur action. And then if I adjust the shutter speed higher, then it'll be a lot more choppy. It'll be like this, and you can see everything. So that's the difference between seeing a streak, like a raindrop. If you're thinking like taking pictures of a rain, the higher the shutter speed, you actually get to see the rain, in action. In action photos, you see like how clear everything's like still. Well, and it's very sharp. But then if you did it with, the other direction, whereas you open up the shutter speed, you'll start seeing those streaks and blurs when you have motion into your picture. So shutter speed is very, very important. It plays a huge effect on the quality and the style, the look of your image. But for the rule of thumb, for what you guys need to do, especially you're just probably going to be doing talking head stuff, keep your shutter speed at 148 or 1/50, depending on your camera settings, what that allows it to do. It's always double or the nearest to the double of what your frame rate per second is. Oh, this is making sense so far. Color temperature. This color temperature is extremely important because this is what's going to affect. A lot of people will keep it on auto. That is fine. A lot of people will, sometimes if they don't have it on auto, they have it on daylight. It's super, like they're inside and they have it on daylight. It's like super orange. Or if you're outside and you have it on, you have it on indoors setting, then it's like super blue. Well, that's because of your color temperature. Daylight is, the color temperature is measured by by Kelvin, and it's a number called Kelvin something, but otherwise known as like, numbers like 2800 K to 56 or 7200 K. It depends on the camera settings. Essentially, this is kind of, not to go into too much detail, if you are outside, that's what really, that's known as like regular daylight, you really want your color temperature to be around 5600 and above. That's going to allow to get you a little bit more warmer tones. If you are inside, and you're in like a lot of tungsten lighting, then you're going to be talking about the color temperature to be around 2800 to 3200. So you want to go the opposite direction. Right now, I'm at 5600 because my light that I have here, and like most people's lights, it is known as daylight. This temperature of this light is about 5600. So I adjust my color temperature on my camera to 5600 K. 5600 Kelvin, and that's going to give you a little bit more of a reality neutral, pleasant looking face, versus if I went the other direction. If I decide to go 3200, it will look like this. Here, let me go ahead and cut. So here's at regular color, or what we call color balanced, color temperature balanced. If I decide to go cooler, or should I say warmer, I'm sorry. If I decide to go warmer, it's going to go really blue, because I'm going to go towards the 3200 Kelvin side, and you'll see, whoops, that's brightness, my bad. Let me change this. You'll see that it goes really, really blue. Now, it's a cool look. If you're trying to do something in snow, or you're trying to make it look dreary or cold, that's a cool look. And then the opposite is if I go really orange, that's really bright in the sun. So this would work if I was outside, but that's too much. So I'm just evening it up. All right. Hope that kind of helps. So the color temperature plays a huge involvement. You always want to be color balanced. Like I said, if you're inside with a light that's a LED and it's typically 5600, you're going to go 5600. You're going to be more on the warmer side, and then on the cooler side, daylight side. And then if you're like with more of yellow or orange lighting, you need to go to more 3200 or below. We do have a question. It says custom white balance using gray card versus manual setting. Yeah, gray cards are more, I think, yes, gray card. You could definitely use gray cards. Gray cards are great, especially to get your exposure right. That's what's really kind of helps it for is more of an exposure. You usually, when you do a white balance, you're going to use like a piece of paper, like a white piece of paper, something that's really more white where in the subject that you're shooting. A gray card's more for exposure, and honestly, not too many people are going to be using gray cards for this particular thing to get the exposure right. Exposure is going to be, I'm depending on the level that you're at. You use your histogram in your camera, and you'll be able to see your peaks. Make sure you're not topping out on the highlights, and you're not crushing the shadows. So manual settings, this is if you decide to go into the manual settings. A lot of people will go ahead and use the auto settings on this. That's perfectly fine. However, if you're really trying to narrow down and make it look good, you really want to learn how to use your manual settings, and then you'll go into this. So play around with it, go in your manual settings, get into playing with the color temperature, seeing what kind of effects it does for you. And that way you'll be able to determine which kind of look you want. Like I said, though, this is taking the approach that you're just wanting to do some talking head stuff. When you get into more B-roll and more cinematic things, then definitely be a little bit more, creative when it comes to that. But for people that are just want to do talking head stuff, you can either leave the color temperature at auto, or you can go ahead and adjust them manually, but just understand how that color temperature works. So something like this, I'm at 5600 Kelvin for my color temperature. ISO settings. All right, before I actually go into ISO settings, so far we have the frame rates per second established. We have the shutter speed established. Those two things typically will just stay the same, right? Like those are almost never really messed with unless you're trying to do something different or creative. Out of that, these will stay the same, and the only time you really change the color temperature is if you're going to different lighting areas, right? Different lighting changes, inside, outside, something that's well lit, something that's not, something that's tungsten lighting versus LED lighting, that type of stuff. So, but that's the only time you change the color temperature. Iris, otherwise known as f-stop. I'm going to kind of skip over ISO settings. Iris is something that you also play with, and there does a play effect on the image. The iris is really going to be determined by your lenses that you use, right? So when you see a lens that has like an f4 or above, that's telling you that this is how much they allow the blades of the iris of the lens to open up. The lower, the more open you go, the lower the number it is. And so what this does, for what effect this does, is when you have an iris that's all the way open, let's say like for example my lens that I have here on this camera, it has a 1.8 aperture. It's otherwise known as aperture. So it has a 1.8 aperture. And this iris also talks about when people refer to the speed of your lens, they're like, how fast is your lens? Well, the lower the number, the faster the lens is, meaning that how much more open and light they could give. And it does help, especially in more dark situations. So if you have a camera that like a mirrorless camera or a DSLR, and you're messing with a lens, then this really will play a huge effect on your image. So for example, if you are wanting to have a lot more of the bokeh effect, where it's like very blurred in the background and very everything is in focus in the foreground, that a lot of it, while spacing and distance plays involved with that, it also has to do with the how fast your lens is, and that's the iris. So the more open your iris becomes, the more blurry your background gets, and then the more closed your iris goes. So it does play effect on your exposure. Then the more clear, and the depth of field is far less. The shallow depth of field is far less versus this. So when do you use your iris? When it's like wants to be at an f12 or an f8. Typically people that shoot landscapes, they want to have that very far background of the mountains to be crystal clear and sharp and in focus. Then that's when you'll do where your f-stop will be a little bit more on the closure side. You're not going to open it all the way up, because if you open all the way up, those mountains are going to be extremely blurry. So the f-stop needs to be a little bit more like in the f8, f9, whatever the case may be. That's when that happens. If you want more of the cinematic, close-up look, and you want to have that blurred bokeh background, the faster your lens is, the more open it will be. Right now, I have my lens. What you're seeing right here is at a 2.8 aperture speed or f-stop, and if I go any more than, sometimes my focus, my autofocus will lose me, and it'll search for me. So I try to give it a little bit of more of a leeway. But if I open it up a little bit more, I will get brighter, and then, but this will be blown out. So when you have these settings in place, obviously you want to determine what you want your look to be. Once again, if you are just doing a sitting down type of segment, it's okay to be able to really just open up your lens as much as you want, as much as you can. And then you can adjust once you have your shutter speed, your frame rates per second, and your iris set. You're going to be looking at this and you're going to be like, it's either way too bright, or not bright enough. It's way too dark. The exposure of your image. This is when you go into your ISO settings. Your ISO, then what it does is that allows to burst in more light and exposure. Now, when you drive the ISO higher, you are pushing the sensor much more for the camera sensor. So depending on the camera or the whatever camera that you use, depending on it, it's really going to determine how far you could push that ISO setting up, because the higher the ISO that you would use for exposure, the more you're opening yourself to more grainier look, and you're going to get that digital grain and stuff into it. So, each camera is a little bit different on what their native ISO is, or what the most opportune or the most optimized ISO that you want your camera to be at. The Canon EOS R, I find that 400 is sort of the most optimal ISO to be at. And then obviously I'll adjust from there, depending on if it's a darker situation or if there's too much light. But typically speaking, if I'm outside where there's a lot of light, I keep the ISO at 400. The way I adjust the exposure from there, if I'm outside, is either by my iris, or that's when I need to get an ND filter. Now, I don't have this on that right now. An ND filter is what allows you to keep your shutter speed the same, and it allows you to keep your iris open so you can get that bokeh cinematic look, but it will cut down and give you the stops that you need in order to lower your exposure without ruining or without messing too much of your settings to give it the best look. So ND filters are fantastic. You can get them anywhere. They could be cheap. They could be very expensive. It all depends on which ones you get. But ND filters are an excellent way to be able to help keep you in line with these settings and keep it at the most optimal settings, and then move on, and then adjust with the ND filter. So if you don't have an ND filter and you're seeing that your your ISO is kind of like at the most optimal point, but you're still overly exposed, then adjust your iris first. Try not to do terribly too much because you might lose on that. Yes, ND filters is one of the best purchases you can make. I have a Canon C200 cinema camera. It already comes installed with ND filters on there, and so it's beautiful that I could just, with a click of a button, I'll be able to stop down my exposure. So, but those are, I hope that was a lot of information there. I've gone 30 minutes into it. But the basic settings is frame rates per second at 24, shutter speed 1/50 or 148, color temperature depending on where you're at, either outside or inside. But generally speaking, if you have a LED light, you want to be in more in the 5600 Kelvin. If you're in more of the tungsten lighting, you want to be at 32 or below, 3200 or below. If you're outside, you're going to be 5600 or higher. ISO settings is just going to depend on your camera, but generally speaking, play around with them, but use your ISO settings. If you're like underexposed, you could bump it up your exposure through that if you already have all your iris all the way up. But the higher that your ISO goes, the more grain and noise you're going to get in your image. Now, there's things to fix that. If you do have to use a little bit of a noise, there's ways to fix that in post-production. However, you always try to do the best you can on site. So that way, post is much easier to do. And then the iris, like I said, the iris, it's going to depend on your lens and the speed of your lens. Even when you're with your iPhone, if you have your iPhone, if you notice when you know the iris, when you take a pro trip picture, you know how you get that blurred background, and you go in the edit settings and you can actually adjust how much blurriness you want in the back. That's because all you're doing is they are software based type thing where you're messing with the amount of iris, and the higher that you open it up, the more blurred it gets, the higher the f-stop, then obviously a lot more clarity. And like I said, it's not one or the other. It just depends on the situation that you're in. If you're shooting landscapes, obviously your iris is going to be a much more higher versus maybe you're doing something like this where I have my iris open. Judge by the eye. I mean, obviously for a little bit more professionals, they use a graph to decide what is going to be more exposed or not, and that is called a histogram, or even a waveform. But for beginners, just use your eye. Trust your eye. Look for the highlights. Look to make sure that you're well exposed. All right, let's see here. We do have a question. Let's see here. All right. So, moving on. I appreciate you guys' patience. I hope this really helps. So that's one of the things that deals with technical basic camera settings. And like I said, these elements in these camera settings apply to almost every single camera that is out there in some way or fashion. So you're just going to have to go into your camera settings and play around with it and see what works best for within your camera. Now we go into composition. This is actually a picture of mine. The composition is called, we're going to go discuss the rule of thirds, depth of field, flat surface versus dynamic perspective. And kind of going into this composition. So there is a thing called rule of thirds. Now, these rules are always meant to be broken, but there's got to be a reason to it. The rule of thirds, this is why there's if you notice these lines here on this picture, this is how our eyes are much more drawn, and we'll find it a lot more pleasantly to look at when we are lining up our subjects or the thing that we want to be focused on into these cross axes of the thirds. So if you broke up your picture frame into thirds, top and bottom, this is how we kind of look at things a lot more cinematically, right? This is a little bit more pleasing to the look. Even if you look at the way I am structured right now, okay, whoops. Even if you look the way I'm structured right now, it's very symmetrical, right? I'm right dab in the middle, but that's because I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you, and I'm kind of, but I'm still obeying the rule of thirds because my body, it's not too high, it's not too low, it's perfectly symmetrical, and so it makes it a little bit more pleasing to the eye. When I shoot other people, generally speaking, I kind of shoot it like this to where, one, I keep it a little bit adjacent. So it's called look room. So I can add text, or I can add other different motion graphics to the right of her. But even if I didn't, I still use this. This is like a perfectly set, composed shot. And so if you just take your camera and your settings, there's the info settings, and you'll see these, the grid, and you want to look for something that's called the grid, and the grid will definitely give you the rule of the guidelines to be able to do rule of thirds, and you should be good to go. So always kind of keep in play that everything you want to keep in is sort of within these lines, and so you use those lines as your baseline anytime you put a subject into place. And also with landscape too, you want the mountains can be up high. It could be, actually, let's see here, I don't know if I can, anyway, the mountains can be higher, but then if you just adjust it down a little bit lower to more of the rule of thirds law, it'll look a lot more pleasing. So just keep an eye out. Like, what I would do is like take a look at some pictures, portraits, and also like some photography, landscapes, and notice how everything is positioned. A tree, a bush, a mountain. Notice how it's composed or is positioned, and you'll realize if you draw those lines down that picture, you're going to notice that they follow the rule of thirds in order to do that. Another part of composition is depth of field. This is where, and it kind of goes into the flat surface versus dynamic perspective. This is where a lot of people get in trouble with, especially beginners. They, for whatever reason, if you're going to film yourself, let me say that. If you're going to film yourself, and you want to put yourself against a wall, don't ever put your back against the wall. If you have to use a flat surface, pull yourself away from that flat surface, so it's going to add a lot more depth. So for example, this background behind me is very flat. There's no leading lines, there's no depth. However, I added depth because I'm about 4 feet away from this rack. If I scooted back, I've lost all this depth of field, and it's just not a very pleasing look. That's how also you get a little bit more of the bokeh. The further the foreground or the subject is away from your background, the more separated, the more contrast you get on the best and the better look you get, and a lot more cinematic look you get. I hope that makes sense. Otherwise, if you could find a background such as this, this was in a room. I had her stand probably like 30, 40 feet away from this corner of this room. But the room, if you noticed, not only did I position her in the rule of thirds, but I allowed the background and things to kind of lead your eye to her. So if you look at the picture frame, it's almost like pointing at her. The TV's pointing at her. The couch is pointing at her. Everything is pointing at her, and me telling you, this is our subject. This is who you need to pay attention to. This backdrop, all I did was just have her stand away from what I wanted to capture. Okay. She wasn't actually inside that area. So a lot of people are like, hey, I want to use this room, as my backdrop. It's like, great. Don't actually sit in that room, but kind of be able to pull away from it, or that area, pull away from that area. And you're gonna have a better contrast, and it's gonna make that person pop. And so that's where the depth of field and dynamic perspective kind of comes into play. Anytime you get to use leading lines is like, you're an object, a railroad, anything that kind of points towards in depth into that picture is fantastic to use, and it's very appealing to use. I always try to use as much leading lines as I possibly can. I know it's a little bit more difficult when you're in an office and you're just like, you're using your desk, or you're using, but if you are going to use that flat surface, just understand, move away from that flat surface. Okay. And a flat surface could be a good look. A lot of YouTubers use a flat surface. They use like a green screen or a backdrop, right? Where it's like a light in the back. And, but whatever you do, you don't stand right up against it. You go away from it. I'm fine doing that. Makes your subject pop out more. Yes, your subject will definitely pop out more, and it's going to be focused more onto your subject. A lot more appealing. Stabilizing tools. So composition is a huge key on what your footage is going to definitely, by just working on composition, your footage is already going to look a lot more professional than as if someone was just, an amateur. Stabilizing tools. Look, these are widely important, and there's definitely tricks that we can do. We have, obviously you have a tripod. I would get a tripod. If you have a phone, you can use a Jovi tripod, something like this. You can hook this around. It's really, here, let me kind of go like this. This is a cool little tripod if you're shooting off of your phone, or you have a connection to a regular tripod. That all it does is just helps stabilizes your footage. Doesn't look shaky or just really distracting, especially if you're just doing talking head stuff. A gimbal device is great, gives you those nice, especially if you're doing some B-roll footage and you want it to be a little bit more appealing, not just, and you want to add some subtle movement. A gimbal device. Now, if you don't have a monopod, is like a tripod just but with one leg, and it allows a lot more. Like this would be kind of considered a monopod. This is a GoPro. This turns into a tripod, but this could be a handheld. This is a handheld device for a GoPro, so you can actually, do some extra handheld work, but also, use it as a tripod. You could use it as a monopod. It's really, really, really nice. Cameras these days, they have majority of them now having built-in image stabilizers. Utilize it very carefully. So if you're going handheld and you want a smooth motion because you don't have a gimbal, but your camera does have an image stabilizer inside the camera, or if it's like a digital image stabilizer, turn it on. And that will take away a lot of the jitters that you would normally naturally have if you were doing a handheld shot, and you can almost get away and make it look like it was from a gimbal or a drone shot where it's nice and smooth and silky. Like I said, though, these are all tools. Not every time to use it. Not one's better than the other. It's just about the look that you're looking for. But if you're doing talking head videos, it's very, very important to be able to keep engaged, to add B-roll. And B-roll helps tell the story. And to get dynamic B-roll, if you're trying to shoot your own dynamic B-roll to showcase exactly what it is that you're talking about, these are the different tricks and trades that people do to be able to shoot, to film that B-roll to make it look a little bit more appealing. Your iPhone, if you're shooting off of your iPhone, it does have already an image stabilizer in it. That's why you could walk around and make it look like you have on a gimbal device. iPhones do great with the image stabilization. That's why a lot of people can film just handheld and using your hands versus buying yourself one of these things. This is just, to me, is easier to hold, doesn't hurt your hand as much, and you can place it somewhere else. But that's always a good thing to have. So I would definitely suggest either definitely getting a tripod. If you are, if you're going handheld, you're in a place where you can't carry a tripod or a gimbal, but you're trying to get some steady stuff, you could use your DSLR or your mirrorless straps that it comes with, and you can use that against your neck and pull it, and that almost acts as a stabilizer for yourself, and you can almost shoot like this, and it'll keep that tension and keep it very stabilized. That's another little trick and hack. When you do get a tripod, the cheaper the tripods, obviously you don't get more of the fluid heads. You just get like a tripod that keeps it and stayed in one place. Obviously in video, I try to find the most fluid I don't expect people to spend $2,000 on a tripod, but I just did. That's because I needed a heavier, more fluid head on the tripod. But anytime you get an opportunity to be able to like have a nice fluid head, that's going to give you the smooth motions, so you could do some pans, some tilts, and when you're shooting some B-roll on a tripod. Lightweight is definitely important. It just all depends on what you're looking for. If you travel a lot, a monopod is very excellent with a good fluid head. Makes it easy to travel with. And these Jovi tripods are great too. So there's that for the camera settings. The other element, man, we are going long. I really apologize. The other element that we want to work on, and honestly, this if you're very limited on your budget, if you're limited on a you don't know what to invest in first, but you do have an iPhone or you do have one of these already at hand. Honestly, the very first thing I would invest in is into great audio. Invest in audio, because here's the thing: bad video, there's ways to fix bad video, there's ways to cover up bad video, but when you have bad audio, honestly, bad audio going in is bad audio going out. There's obviously some post-production, there's some post-production that could fix it, but you want to do the best that you can to get the best audio, because here's the thing: no one's going to watch your video if there's bad audio or understand what's talking about. It's very distracting. And then audio is the number one key. So investing into a like Rode mic. Rode is a pretty I would say it's definitely a higher end than like if you just look. They make some higher end mics, but at a very lower budgeted cost versus if you went through other audio sources like Sennheiser or Shure or Electrosonic. Rode does a very good job for all levels of type of consumer levels mics. They make really, really, really great consumer level mics. Matter of fact, I use some of their mics on my own stuff. Now, when I need more than just one mic, I'll hire an audio guy. And they have a lot more higher end stuff than I do, but just to get away with a mic, I have like a wireless Rode Bluetooth mic. I also have a Rode shotgun mic that I use, but honestly, for anyone, it's going to depend on your budget. But the Rode wireless mics, they're really fantastic, and I think they range around $300 to $400. Worth it. Those are actually pretty inexpensive compared to other higher end audio sources. But Rode does definitely do a fantastic job on their consumer based type wireless mics or audio sources. And I highly suggest that that's what you need to invest in before you do anything else. in different, like when you try and figure out what mic, I mean, right now, this mic that I'm using right now is just a condenser mic. I just chose to use it, but I could use a wireless for when I talk, or I could use a shotgun mic over the top of my head. I just decided to use a condenser mic because, one, it helps eliminate a lot of the background noises. I mean, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I mean, I have a lawn guy out there right now that's going and doing lawn. So if you can't hear it, then this condenser mic is doing its job. But if you're just starting out, getting yourself a nice, decent Rode wireless mic you'll be able to use for any situations. They do make adapters so you can plug it into your phone, and you want to make sure you adjust those levels. Also, another great option too is when you're recording video, especially if you're recording, if you're using a DSLR, having a separate audio recording device. Zoom is a great company that makes great audio recording devices. They range from different prices and different levels, but you just need to get something very basic where you can plug in, and then you can go ahead and record your audio separately. The reason why that's also a very good thing to record your audio separately than actually going into your camera is that if anything happened to your camera, it shuts off, your audio goes off. But when you record it separately, you still have your audio source that you could pull from and use it for other purposes. And you can adjust levels much better, and it sounds a lot more clear. It's better recording. I generally so when I'm on my on a professional shoot, I actually have three. I actually have three ways I'm recording audio. So when I bring on an audio guy, he'll plug into my camera. So I'm recording through my camera the audio. He's also recording it off of his audio mixer. And then I also have a backup that is recording on another camera. So again, audio sources all the time. I mean, that's the very first thing that, like I said, I will invest in. It's the very first person I bring on a set is an audio guy. And there's just so much you could do. Now, another couple of tricks if you're in your house and you have a lot of echo, put down mats or moving blankets or any type of blankets below you. That's going to help a lot with your audio and make it a little bit more flat, so you have a lot more clear, not so echoey audio. There's also soundboards you could purchase and set up if you're looking to do a little bit more of a studio format. But there's a lot of cool little tricks you could do with audio, and that's something that I highly suggest. But Rode is a good source to use. Yeah, Rode and Deity. I don't know who Deity is. Deity. Both have great prices here. Radad says the Rode and Deity both have great prices for consumers. Yeah, I don't know Deity that well, but I do know Rode is great for consumers. And even professionals. Like I said, I use it. I hope this is helping, Radad Chad. I know that you kind of wanted me to go into this. Like I said, this is very basic level. I understand you probably know a lot of this already, but hopefully it does kind of help, especially when it talks to composition, and what's going to be able to make you in the settings of your camera, what's going to make that the best, like to be able to up level, especially your B-roll, is just understanding how the aperture works and understanding how different things that you could do. Along with ND filters, you could get other filters to make it a little bit more dreamy. You could soften up the diffusion on it. There's a lot of different things you could do. So lighting is a huge thing. And honestly, a lot of times people think you need a lot of light to do a lot of things. And I want to tell you, lighting, less is more. Less is more. So I want to give you an example what I mean by that. You really only need one solid good key light, and you could do a lot. That's awesome. Thank you. That's awesome, right at Chad. I'm glad it's giving you some more confidence. If you really want to improve your image, lighting, you got to have great lighting, but you don't have to have a lot of lighting. And what I find and what I tend is that the little bit less light that I use, like light fixtures and light stuff, the better, almost the image it gets. And it's, you could do some very dynamic, amazing stuff with just one light. This picture right here is a video that I did. And there's literally only one light on the subject, on Chacho there. Is one key light. I use the Aperture 120D Mark II light. It is a little bit more of a higher professional end light, but you could buy any like newer lights or lights off of Amazon to get like one great key light. And how you soften that up, I'm going to give you some practical, or some kind of like tips. You can buy a soft box. Okay, so before I go into any of this is my first point is that you could do a lot with just one light. Now, the other little light behind there where you see in the painting and the picture, that's a little practical light that I used. That is this. I use this light. So there's technically two lights that I'm using in this picture. I turn all the lights off in the whole room. I use this light to light up that little picture and then in the background to kind of highlight that. And then I used one key light, which was the Aperture, with a softbox or the dome softbox on the subject. And how you light the subject is never really, I place the light a little bit to the side of him so I can have some shadows on the other side of the face. That helps shape the face. Lighting helps shape your face. When you have a light that is directly on you, you look blown out, and it actually it doesn't do very well with the shaping of your face. So I try to stay away from ring lights as much as possible. I know that's a big thing. It's cool for TikToks and some people that want to do quick social media things where they buy ring lights where they could place their phone in the middle of it. Ring lights, if that's what you have, use it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. I just am not a particular fan of it, and for several reasons. Ring lights are very, very harsh, even though they give you they'll give you an attachment to it to help soften it up. They're still very harsh. You see the ring light in people's eyes every time someone uses a ring light. I see it. It's right in their pupil of their eyes. It's lit up. It's distracting when I look into someone's eyes or I'm watching someone and I see the ring light, the reflection of the ring light in their pupil of their eye. And I don't like light directly on the subject or on you. I always have it slightly to the little side to give you a little bit more of a dynamic look. Right now, what you're seeing right here one of my lights in the background are this way. Right there. Burned out. That's okay. Just died of battery, whatever. What you're seeing right here, it may actually look a little bit more filled because I have a soft light, a soft box. I have it opened up a little bit, but there is still some shadows right here, but I have the light to the side and up and over. And so it creates like a little bit of a shadow. And I'm only using one light to light this up. That's it. One light. And then a couple of practical lights in the background. And so less is more. Don't feel like you have to have a lot. Less is more. You could use any type of light structure or that you could get, whatever your budget allows you to do. But, it's okay to invest in, $100 or $200 worth of lights and stands. And that way you can really, really just look great. And when I finally get a studio, I'm considering a 120D Mark II. Actually, it's not a bad price in comparison to other lights. No, it's really not a bad price. Actually, Aperture just came out with some new budgeted lights. They're like $200, $250, and they're very much like the 120D. They're just not as they're the consumer version of the 120D Mark II. They came out with some new ones. I forget what they're called. They just released them. I'm actually thinking about getting a couple of them myself. They're really, really, really nice lights. and they're very, very, very inexpensive compared to what they also have. So there's some really great lights that you could get. But like I said, you don't need much. You could, if you're in a strict budget, get at least one light. That's not a ring light, but get a light that's you could get a newer, or you could get go on Amazon, or you go on B&H and see. But it's really worth getting a great light. Now, when you get that light, you can either purchase a softbox, which is what allows it to be a lot more soft lighting. It's not so harsh. It stops down the light, and it gives a little bit more pleasant look to your face. It helps smooth out your face a little bit. That is a big old softbox. But if you don't want to spend the money on that, the other ways to diffuse the light to give you a much more softer look, softer touch, especially if you're doing Zoom calls. Sometimes Zoom calls, you see people's lights and it's really, really harsh, but you want a little bit more pleasantly light to it. Add like a white bed sheet or like a shower hanger, one of those shower the shower liners. That will stop down the light tremendously and give you a little bit more of a softer look. Also, what do you call it? Saran wrap, not saran wrap, but the partridge paper, or whatever that's called. That helps stops down the light, makes a lot more of a softer look. So there's definitely some tricks, some hacks to use if you don't want to spend the money on a softbox and you're wanting to be able to still get the soft look to it. Those are some things that you can use right now. You may already have in your house: partridge paper, a bed sheet, real light bed sheet, or a shower hanger, and it'll help spread the light and make it softer, or a shower liner. So my battery's about to die, and I appreciate whoops, that's it. Let me go ahead and cut this. I appreciate you going, man. It's been an hour. I told you it was a lot of information. Play around. The best thing I highly suggest is just start shooting and start creating and playing around with those settings, seeing what each thing does, and get creative. Get creative with your lights. Product videos. You see a lot of product videos. They'll set up a little section, and then they'll move like one of these lights around the product, and it kind of adds a little bit more of a better dimension to it. It's fun. But these are the elements. So if you break it down to three things, if I break it down, and here are my camera settings, audio, and lighting, there's going to be a lot you're going to be able to do to really increase the value of your video, or increase the look of your video, and being a lot more pleasant and looking way more professional than versus if you're just taking the camera and shooting it. Even if you just pick one of the things out of this, the composition. If you just work on the composition, your video is going to look better. If you just work on having the best audio, you're going to have the best content available, and you're going to be able to repurpose it like no one else. If you just work with one light and just play around with it and know how to not to set it up directly in front of you, but kind of sort of to the side, so you get this nice shadow, your stuff is going to look already better. So if you guys have any questions or any comments below, please go ahead and say that. Rad at chat. I appreciate you if you share. Share. I know you subscribe, but share this information if this is helpful. I could go a little bit more into more detail later on. But these are some of the basics that you go through and that we think about every time we're on set. Even though it's elementary, I use and practice these elementary skills every single day, and every time I do a shoot, every time I am filming myself. It is something that, the more that you do, the more it becomes second nature. So you guys have a great rest of the week. This is my last video for this week, and I'll talk to you guys later. See you guys next week. Peace.